So a very good morning, afternoon, evening to you all from wherever you're joining us from around the world today. My name is Professor Tahseen Jaffrey and I'm the Director of the Centre for Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian University in the UK. It is my pleasure and honour to be your moderator for our event today. On behalf of the permanent missions of the State of Qatar, Bangladesh, Chile, France, Kenya, Morocco, Tajikistan, to the United Nations in New York, UNEP and the United Nations Foundation, to this special side event on protecting public health from climate-related threats, and on the occasion of the high-level political forum on sustainable development, under the specific theme, Sustainable and Resilient Recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and one that promotes the economic, social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development, and really looking at and focusing on building an inclusive and effective path for the achievement of the 2030 agenda. Just by way of background and a few things to note, according to the World Health Organization, climate change is expected to increase mortality from malnutrition, cardiovascular disease, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. Some existing health threats will intensify and new health threats will emerge as the climate continues to change and humans continue to encroach on the natural environment. Needless to say, it is the low and middle income countries likely to suffer the worst impacts, where adaptive capacity and economic vulnerability limit adequate preparation for the impacts of climate change on health. So, for example, we know that climate change induced undernutrition will occur and in currently food insecure areas as a combination of high temperature and humidity. So evidence points to the fact that, particularly in the 2018 report of the Lancet Countdown, that climate change represents the biggest global threat of the 21st century. The Harvard Public School has similarly stated that many of the root causes of climate change increase the risk of pandemics too. So with all that in mind, it's turning to this event. And this event today allows us the opportunity to, first of all, discuss and examine the intersection between climate change and public health. Secondly, to determine preventative measures and approaches to pandemics driven by climate change. And thirdly, significantly, to identify not just the unique challenges but what we really want to do is look at the entry points for greater collaboration between the health, the development, and the climate sectors. So this event is split into two parts. First, we'll be hearing a series of high-level addresses, and this will be followed by a panel discussion. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to hand over to our very first speaker. I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Badr Omar Ismail Al-Dafa, Special Envoy of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar for Climate Change and Sustainability. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's really my honor to be with such a distinguished crowd. I will have some opening remarks, and I will say it is a great pleasure for me to open this special meeting on protecting public health from climate-related threats on the occasion of the high-level political Forum 2021. The State of Qatar is honored to co-sponsor this event with Bangladesh, Chile, France, Kenya, Morocco, Tajikistan, UNEP, and the United Nations Foundation. Qatar values all efforts aiming to support sustainability and the health of the people and planet. If, on one hand, protecting health is a key motivation for climate action, on the other hand, climate action can deliver many benefits to health. In December 2012, Qatar was the force behind the Doha Declaration on Climate Health and Well-being, drafted by the Global Climate and Health Alliance. The declaration states that health must be central to climate action, both at the national and the global level. At home, we have implemented a number of initiatives that highlights the importance of these issues across ministries and different sectors. We are pioneering sustainable healthcare innovation through water management. We produce safe drinking water for 100% of our population, thanks to the cutting-edge desalination technologies. As the host of the FIFA World Cup 2022, sustainability is at the core of our preparations. It will be the first carbon neutral tournament through the use of solar powered stadiums and the use of cooling and lighting technology that is water and energy saving, with far-reaching implication for public health. Are innovative low-carbon technologies in various industries, from food to construction and aviation, reducing fossil fuel consumption, improving air quality, and improves public health. Shifting to cleaner, safer, lower carbon energy system will save millions of lives every year. Qatar is also one of the world's biggest proponents of what is known as a green building, which is defined by urban development that follow high standards of efficiency, both in energy consumption and cooling, as well as environmental standards. Improving insulation in homes and buildings can protect people from extreme temperature and reduce energy consumption. Overall, we are helping to create generation who understand health issues and are able to build a knowledge-based and a greener economy. Qatar commitment to our national borders. We have prioritized food sustainability coupled with improving health in the region. Therefore, we are paying special attention to dry land that face many environmental challenges, including water scarcity, temperature extremes, drought, and floods. This is why Qatar initiated in 2013 the Global Dry Land Alliance, an international organization to support countries deal with food insecurity consequences and negative environmental change. Qatar is founding member of the Global Green Growth Development Institute, the 3GIs, providing developing countries with tools to build institutional capacity and develop a green growth policy, reinforce peer learning and knowledge sharing, and engage private investors and public donors. We have long-standing commitment to the LLDCs, and SIDs to support them to address and combat climate change challenges, build a broader resilience and ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, including sustainable health system. I will stop here. Looking forward to hearing the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and it's wonderful to hear all the different perspectives that are currently in place, and ranging from clean energy technology solutions right through to building capacity of our younger generation in terms of building their knowledge. But it's a wonderful range of activities, and I'm sure we will come back and revisit that shortly. What I would like to do now is hand over to Her Excellency Rabab Fatima, Permanent Representative of Bangladesh. Welcome.
Thank you, Professor Jaffrey. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and friends, good evening from Dhaka. Good morning to everyone in New York. My delegation is delighted to join other co-organizers to welcome you and to thank you for joining us today. As Mr. Al-Dafa and Professor Jaffrey have just highlighted, the nexus between climate change, human and planetary health is very well established. Over the years, our activities have given rise to alarming risks to human and planetary health. WHO estimates that there would be about 250,000 additional deaths each year from 2030 onwards due to climate-induced health hazards. There is also growing evidence of climate-related mental illness. The COVID-19 pandemic has put sharp focus on the need for adequate investment in our health infrastructure. Future health systems would have to be resilient enough to tackle any shocks, including those arising from adverse impacts of climate change. We have an expert panel today to discuss these issues in length, and we are keenly looking forward to hearing from them. Let me share a few initial thoughts and ideas. First, the alarming rise of global temperature is one of the root causes of many human diseases. We must therefore act urgently to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and achieve net zero emission by 2050. This should be our top priority in the COP26 summit. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the fore the high risk of zoonotic diseases. We see One Health agenda as an effective way forward against such risks. My Prime Minister is co-chairing the One Health Global Leaders Group on antimicrobial resistance. We wish to see more support in pursuing this important agenda in the coming days. Thirdly, climate change has disproportionate health impacts on the people living in climate vulnerable countries, such as low-lying coastal countries, SIDS, and LDCs. There should be adequate resources and technology support for them to build stronger health infrastructure to tackle climatic hazards. As the current president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Bangladesh will make every effort to place the climate financing and technology transfer issues high on the upcoming COP26 agenda. Fourthly, for achieving a healthy and climate resilient post-COVID recovery, we must place prevention at the heart of our efforts. Prevention has always proven to be far more effective and less expensive than response. We therefore support the recent proposal by IPBES for launching a high-level intergovernmental council on pandemic prevention involving both climate and health actors. The 2021 Global Conference on Health and Climate Change provides us with a good opportunity to advance this agenda. Finally, Madam Moderator, distinguished colleagues, we must ensure quality universal health coverage for all to make our communities more resilient. Let me rest it there. We all look forward to a very robust discussion today, and thank you once again for joining us today. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm just picking up a couple of points that I think is really pivotal right here, right now. And I think you touched on it. It's not just about the physical impacts that climate is having on our societies, but the huge devastation it's having on mental health, particularly on women and girls. And it's an area that I think globally we don't know enough about, but we need to be putting a lot of energy and effort into that, particularly on the back of the pandemic too. But also your point about supporting the poorest and the most vulnerable people in the world who have contributed little, if anything, to global carbon emissions. So it's really important that you know we try and get a sense of direction on that too. So thank you, Your Excellency, for those points. I'd like to now introduce you to His Excellency Omar Hilale, who's the permanent representative of Morocco. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The Kingdom of Morocco is pleased to co-sponsor this side event on the occasion of the high-level political forum, and they wish to warmly thank the permanent mission of Qatar to take the lead on it and for choosing the topic of protecting public health from climate-related threats. This topic is very relevant today as the world is taking steps toward recovering from COVID-19 pandemic while facing the biggest threat to humanity, which is climate change. Climate change influences human health and disease in numerous ways. COVID-19 has reminded us of the intimate relationship between people and nature, and has tough quotas that existing health threats will intensify and new health threat will emerge in the future. Today, more than ever before, binding action is urgently required to protect the millions of citizens around the world. Thus, health is jeopardized by a warming planet, heat waves, acute water scarcity, air pollution, industrial waste, plastic and microplastic pollution, the acidification of oceans leading to biodiversity loss. In the same way, the world has relied to overcome the challenges of the global pandemic. We need to rally to protect our most valuable resource, the health of our planet and our children, from the growing climate-related threats. Let me illustrate with a few figures today. Today, according to the recent WHO reports, as many as 12.9 million women are working in the informal waste sector, which potentially exposes them to toxic waste and put them and their unborn children at risk. Meanwhile, more than 18 million children and adolescents, some as young as 5 years of age, are actively engaged in the informal industrial sector. They live, go to school, and play near industrial areas where high levels of toxic chemicals, mostly lead and mercury, can damage their intellectual ability. In Africa, studies predict that climate change will cause a 10% drop of rainfall by the year 2050, which is already leading to a major water shortage. Although Africa is the continent least responsible for climate change, it is particularly vulnerable to the effects. Those figures illustrate that human activity around the world has direct consequences on global health, and it does not impact communities equally. The most vulnerable are always most at risk. Morocco fully recognizes the consequence of the adverse impact of climate change on the full realization of the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. My country commits to fostering health access in line with climate change adaptation efforts. In this regard, Morocco has launched several programs and initiatives that give a particular attention to all environmental determinants of health, such as clean air, safe drinking water, adequate and safe sanitation infrastructures, sufficient and nutritious food, and secure shelter for all Moroccans. We believe in the efficiency of thinking globally and acting locally, and have been enhancing gradually and regularly our emergency health preparedness and response system through strengthening capacities at the national and local levels to mitigate the impact of climate change and natural disasters on health across all the Moroccan territory. To conclude, I just want to stress on the following quote: nature sustains life, and we will all be losers if we don't achieve peace with the planet. A healthy planet is critical for healthy population and for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our solutions to the current crisis must expand opportunity, reduce stark inequalities, and respect planetary boundaries. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish the side events contribute to this global effort. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and you've raised some really important points there, talking about children working in the informal sector. And as we know globally, as we head towards a transition to net zero, the number of children that will be involved working in mines and digging out cobalt to power the batteries that will fuel our new energy generation. So there are many issues to consider. And also in relation to the point that you said about protecting the rights of everyone, this really is a huge agenda, and in a way we have a duty of care to ensure that the poorest are protected, and the way I see it, ensuring that there's inclusivity, voice, representation and participation of all voices, particularly from those at the bottom end of the socioeconomic ladder, to be involved in developing some of these solutions and being the recipients of some of the solutions as well. So thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your remarks there. I would like to now turn my attention to His Excellency Jonibet Hikmat, who's the permanent representative of Tajikistan to the United Nations. So over to you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, dear participants. It's a privilege to be part of this important gathering. Climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our times, and its impact affects all spheres of our lives. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic, which threatens global health and livelihood, creates a serious barrier for the international community's efforts in achieving SDGs. Indeed, climate change threatens human health and well-being in many ways. For instance, the increase of severe weather events, extreme heat, air pollution, water-related disasters, etc. According to the WHO, climate change is expected to increase mortality from malnutrition, cardiovascular disease, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. It should be mentioned that almost 90% of the people affected by climate change are victims of water-related natural disasters, including floods, landslides, droughts, and tsunamis. Climate change has been one of the major causes of poverty, health, and reversing developmental gains, and is projected to worsen existing problems, which communities already lack the infrastructure to address them. Dear participants, Tajikistan is among those countries that also suffers from the impact of the climate change and highly prone to natural and other disasters, taking a toll on human life, destroying infrastructure, and hampering future social and economic development of the country. In recent years, we have witnessed a significant increase in the number of water-related disasters, which annually cause human losses and bring significant financial damage to the country's economy. The intensity of natural disasters during the last year has increased by 20% in our country. The situation undermines efforts to achieve SDGs. To this end, preventive measures should be taken because they are usually much cheaper than its actual damages we receive as a result of natural disasters. It's important to prioritize investment in preventive infrastructure and community-based efforts in addition to disaster recovery. Dear colleagues, interlinkages between water and climate change is a key factor in protecting public health. Moreover, water is vital for sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene is one of the important preventive measures during the COVID crisis. According to the UN Secretary General's report, Share Responsibility, Global Solidarity, more than 50% of the world's rural population and more than 20% of the urban population lack legal healthcare coverage, while 2.2 billion lack access to safe water and 4.2 billion to basic sanitation, which depriving people of frequent hand washing, which is the most effective prevention measure against the COVID. The widespread call for hand washing involved the increase in using fresh water. When it comes to hygiene, such a vital resource as water becomes even more important. Access to water and sanitation is key determinant of health and prerequisite for hygiene, and the key pillar in preventing and combating any disease transmission. Therefore, water is a fundamental element that helps the world and region to restore its capacities for mastering the current crisis and its consequences, and to be more resilient when we face the next crisis. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And you've raised some, I mean, the numbers that you present there speak volumes for themselves. I mean, I think the numbers are absolutely staggering. And but I really welcome your thoughts about community-based efforts in trying to address some of these challenges, and indeed as a pathway to building resilient communities and enabling better health outcomes and well-being for all. But it's really interesting, as you said at the beginning, around the victims of disasters, and I wonder whether we should be trying to look at supporting victims so that they are empowered and become not seen as victims, but very much part of the solution to addressing the climate crisis. So I really welcome your rounded thoughts there, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. I'd like now to hand over to Her Excellency, Ms. Njambi Kinyungu, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Public of Kenya. You're welcome.
Thank you, Tahsin. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and participants, good afternoon. Kenya is honored to co-sponsor this side event with Bangladesh, Chile, France, Morocco, Qatar, Tajikistan, UNEP, and UN Foundation. And we would like to warmly welcome the participants, and I would like to say karibuni. We see this as an important platform to contribute views on the linkages between public health and climate change and the preventive measures that we as stakeholders can deploy. Indeed, tackling the impacts of climate change is an urgent and fundamental development challenge for many developing countries, especially for African countries and small island developing states, which continue to face the worst impacts of extreme weather conditions. In Kenya, successive impacts of climate change result in great socioeconomic losses, estimated at 3.5% of gross development product annually, impacting development efforts. And this has led, we also have seen floods and droughts that have caused diverse and adverse impacts, not only on health, but on property, human lives, as well as infrastructure. We have also observed rising incidences of malaria in higher altitude areas, waterborne diseases from contaminated water resources, and respiratory health complications from air pollution. Addressing public health in the context of climate adaptation and resilience is therefore critical. Indeed, it is very urgent. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we would also like to emphasize that financing to mitigate as well as adapt to climate change must be matched by technology development and transfer and enhance local expertise and capacity building if we are to effectively address climate change related threats to private health, to public health. I would just like to speak to what we have been able to do in Kenya. We have taken several steps to mainstream climate change mitigation and adaptation into the health sector through the development and implementation of sector-specific policies, plans, strategies, and legislation in order to align this to the Constitution and also the National Development Blueprint. We have also established National Community Health Strategy, which is ongoing and one that is being rolled out. And we have Community Health Volunteers Manual on Household Air Pollution, again intended to address the nexus between climate change, air pollution, and health. Proper waste management and recycling through the implementation of national and county-based waste management plans has also been prioritized. There is also, with regard to the issue of food, nutrition, and security, which also impacts on health, there is an ongoing boosting of agricultural productivity through climate-smart agriculture interventions to increase food, nutrition, and security. Indeed, more recently, the COVID-19 economic stimulus program, which was initiated in 2020 has enabled supply of subsidized farm inputs through an e-voucher system to more than 200,000 small-scale farmers. On the issue of nature-based solutions, we know that forests play an important role in climate adaptation and building health resilience, both in the cities as well as in the rural areas. In this regard, Kenya targets to achieve 10% tree planting cover, that is growing 2 billion trees by 2022 through various tree planting programs and campaigns, such as the Adapt a Forest initiative, which brings into place the communities taking part in these nature-based solutions. I would also like to emphasize that just and fair energy transitions, which are so important to addressing the issue of pollution with regard to health, is at the core of our development objectives. And Kenya continues to increase renewables in the electricity generation mix of the national grid to ensure access to stable, reliable, and affordable clean energy. Indeed, it should be noted that a truly just fight against climate change will require developed countries to dramatically reduce their own carbon emissions, while at the same time allow developing countries to develop their economies in order to adapt to the challenges caused by climate change. The global challenges we face today require global integrated solutions, and we would urge the international community to have candid deliberations and actionable solutions that will ensure no one is left behind, especially now that we are working on recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We also welcome the continuous efforts that enhance synergies among the various UN entities, such as the United Nations Development Programme, the United Nations Environment Programme, and the United Nations Human Settlements Programme, among other global bodies and stakeholders to ensure human and planetary health. Kenya looks forward to recommendations that will be the outcome of this panel of experts, and we will continue to engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And it was a joy to hear of all the different initiatives that are actually taking place, practical solutions on the ground, from planting trees and so on. And it was really, I think your last points there on issues of just and fairness, I think they're kind of like at the heart of the climate conversations, or ought to be at the heart of climate conversations at the moment. And I think issues of tackling climate inequality and ensuring that we support the most needy is really vital. So issues of climate justice and fairness, and ensuring that our roadmap going forward addresses equity and inequality issues for sure. But finding strategies and approaches to embed these principles is often the challenge going forward, and making sure that we embed the values and the mantra that dialogue presents itself. So thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your comments there. What I would like to do now is introduce you to Inger Andersen, Executive Director of UNEP, who will be providing us with some thoughts on framing, issues around framing.
Well, thank you. And let me thank you, Tamsin, as well as the distinguished delegates and permanent representatives from Bangladesh, Chile, France, Kenya, Qatar, Morocco, and Tajikistan, and of course, our colleagues in the UN Foundation. It's a privilege to speak to this issue, because when we think about what we've learned from the pandemic, well, we've learned a lot, but probably the most important lesson that we have learned is this, that the health of people, the health of economies, and the health of societies are in fact one and the same and can't be separated. And that was a very hard lesson for us to learn. It cost millions of lives. It caused physical and financial hardship. It kept families and loved ones apart. But the sad reality is that however terrible COVID-19 has been, That triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of biodiversity and nature loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste, these three crises would amplify public health challenges almost beyond our comprehension. So as the climate becomes warmer, and we've just heard from the distinguished speakers, and weather patterns shift, diseases will travel further and will travel faster. And as we relentlessly chip away at the natural world, we are destroying these natural buffers that we have against these emerging infectious diseases. Now, research shows that as we alter landscapes for farming and new cities, 30% of emerging contagion can be attributed to land use changes. Not to mention that we risk the loss of the world's pharmacy, because we know that 25 to 50% of pharmaceutical products are in fact derived from plant and other genetic resources, which of course we are losing at a catastrophic rate. So as we continue to pollute our environment through the increase of antimicrobials, through pesticides, through herbicides, and for example, here the antimicrobial resistance is growing, and we give a shout out to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who together with the Prime Minister of Barbados is chairing the AMR task force, a high-level panel. We know that that too is threatening our ability to treat a range of deadly infections where we will need antibiotic as climate changes and as these diseases become more frequent. So I put it to you that we need to act on 5 fronts to ward off these health impacts, to ward off the health impacts on the climate emergency. First, and most obviously, we have to act on climate. Actions to curb climate change are actions to protect people's health. Any health worker will tell you that prevention is better than the cure. Prevention means what? Decarbonizing our economies. Prevention means investing in zero-emission technologies and infrastructure. Prevention means phasing out coal. Prevention means no new coal power plants. Prevention means that all nations update their Paris commitment, their NDCs, to include net zero promises and set clear time-bound plans to meet them. And right now, as we are borrowing sums of unprecedented amount for stimulus packages to restart our economies, we can't, on the one hand, borrow from the future generation and at the same time leave them a broken planet. So that's my first point. The second point is, and we heard that from the distinguished delegate from Kenya, and I had the pleasure of speaking to you from our headquarters in Kenya, Nairobi. Second point is back nature-based solutions. Nature does many, many things much better than we do. We need to let nature do its job. That means pushing hard on the UN decade for ecosystem restoration to protect, to restore, and to manage ecosystems. That means more research, that time can be spent so that we understand that time spent in nature actually improves human health outcomes, from children's brains becoming better wired to better dealing with anxiety and hyperactivity. And of course, when we're in nature, we tend to move, and then we produce de-stress chemicals, the same that doctors prescribed in pill form to patients. So nature-based solutions is not just good for nature, it is very good for us. And of course, when we move in nature, it's also good for cardiovascular and diabetes. And the third point, invest in adaptation. We've heard this from the previous speakers. We know only too well that climate change effects are often unequal, disproportionately impacting populations who have contributed the least to the problem, and vulnerable populations are exposed to an additional 475 million heat wave events globally in 2019. Low-income countries need support and solidarity, or millions will suffer from poorer health outcomes. So here nations need to step up and meet the promises made on adaptation support under the Paris Agreement. And fourth, we need to adopt one health: human health, veterinary health, and atmospheric planetary health. These things are one and the same. And at the end of the day, we can't achieve universal healthcare without expanding the depth of our understanding of these issues. So now really is a time for us to unite climate science and medical science in a uniform effort. And very finally, my fifth point here, we all have to make better food choices. Our individual choices can make a real difference to our health. We are increasingly seeing unhealthy diets, and they're becoming more common worldwide. So it's time for us to have a conversation and to reconsider diets and make food choices that work for people and for planet in the long run. Our food systems, with a focus on cheap processed foods, are contributing to obesity epidemic and to climate change, while playing a major role in threatened extinctions of 1 million plants and animal species. So today, at the Global Conference on Health, at today's event, at the Global Conference on Health and Climate Change, at COP26, and at many other critical meetings, we have to ensure that climate change, nature loss, and pollution become part of the public health issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inger. It's really wonderful to hear the framing as you so nicely presented there, because it ranges not just from the mitigation side of things, but the need to look at adaptation, and adaptation has quite often been the poor relation to mitigation, and trying to get more motivation and direction and support to look at that side of things is very welcome. So I want to thank you for that framing, and I would like to use this opportunity to use this framing and use that as a guide to a set of questions I'd like to ask to our panel speakers. So I'd like to thank you, Inger, for your comments there. I would like to introduce Dr. Maria Neira, Director of the Environment, Climate Change and Health at the World Health Organization. Obviously, a welcome to this event. Dr. Neira, the challenges are immense, and we're hearing from all our speakers so far the complexity of the issues. Can I ask you, Dr. Neira, what has the world learned from the COVID-19 pandemic? And what do you think the lessons are that the WHO will carry forward to help prevent future compounding impacts of climate change and global health?
Thank you very much, Tassin. And you can't imagine the pleasure I'm having listening to the previous speakers. It was music to my ears to see how we are all very well aligned. And I think we are all perfectly convinced of the need of joining forces between the environmental people. Inger, you talk like a Ministry of Health. I mean, we will give you that title very soon. All of you, Morocco, Kenya, all of you have been using very strong arguments that I think if we keep with this logic, with this common sense, with this wise approach, I don't see a reason why we are not going to win. What we have learned, well, you know, human nature have some difficulties to learn, as we all know, but in any case, it's clear that our communities started to operate much better together. Already last year in May, when we were in the middle of the response to the outbreak and all the efforts were concentrating on technologies, treatment, diagnosis, vaccines, at the same time, we realized that being a firefighter was certainly not enough. Of course, you need to stop the fire caused by the virus, but we needed to understand as well why the virus has been able to spread so well, why some populations were more affected by others, and what were the upstream causes. And I think they are very obvious. As Inger was saying, we have been destroying the biodiversity, which is so important for our health. We have been trading and commercializing wild animals. We have been using very aggressive agricultural practices. We have been polluting everything we touch, because we pollute everything we touch, the water, the air, the food. And of course, how can you expect that this will create the perfect conditions for protecting people's health? On the contrary, this will put you on a terrible, vulnerable situation. So if we have learned a lesson, is that now this triangle of human health, environmental health, and animal health is absolutely solid, and it has to be implemented in that way. And in terms of framing and being strategic, this is one extremely important thing. renew One Health and a strategic one, but at the same time, a logic and common sense. Second, there are so many good transitions that we need to do. One is the food transition. Yes, we need to move into more sustainable food system. The other one is the healthy energy transition. We need to move to renewable, clean sources of energy, affordable sources of energy, because this is putting at risk our health. We need to stop giving subsidies to fossil fuels. We need to ensure that the transition to a better urban planning, because our cities are the places where everything is, we are overcrowded, and therefore any infectious agent can perfectly transmit very, very quickly. So if we ensure that those transitions are going to happen, if we interact on a more strategic way on these three pillars of our health, if we are conscious that now we need to speak positive, we need to change our narrative and start to be very positive on the way we tell our population how we are engaging on climate change. Climate change is all that you have been described, but it's as well a horrible problem for our health. The price of climate change is paid by our lungs, is paid by our health system, is paid by our health in general. And this is something that the population needs to understand as soon as possible, because this will take us to the non-regret investments. The governments are now dedicating phenomenal sums of financial resources to ensure this recovery post COVID-19. We need to make sure that those funds are going into the right decision, right direction, and not again being the responsible for structural failures that we are putting in place. And we need to make sure that the COP26, basta with the COPs 26, 20, actually it's the COP 27. It has to be the COP that will provide something solid and in line with the health argument that we have been describing here. WHO will be presenting the health argument for climate action, and I know that all of you will be supporting all of that. We are doing it obviously with other agencies at the UN and many, many health professional partners and networks. And this has to be COP one for action, and start to really put in place all of these measures. Let me finish with something that we have learned. When I talk to my colleagues in public health, I'm teaching them, I ask them, what do you think it means, NDCs? And everybody says, oh, you mean non-communicable diseases, but wrongly spelled. And I say, no, I mean NDCs. Start to learn that. This language has to be incorporated on the public health DNA, because this is about public health. If we implement the national determined contributions, the NDCs, not the NCDs, then the health benefits will be enormous, and it can be the more ambitious public health agenda ever. And this is what we need to tell people. Let's put in place all the mitigation and adaptation measures. Here you are. You will have the best way to protect public health, the best intervention to reduce vulnerability vis-a-vis new crises, and probably the investment that will generate more green jobs, better economy, better recovery, better outcomes on social terms and mental health as well, and a society that we can all be more proud in the future. Last thing, we have been able to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. For climate change, there is a vaccine already. It's in front of us. It's called intelligence, but we need to use it. We need to use it. And then I hope that if we put all together all of these brilliant arguments that you have been presenting, maybe we will be able to develop this vaccine and use it very, very soon, and particularly in November in Glasgow. So I am ready for my injection of vaccine and happy to share it with you if you don't have enough of those. Thank you.
Dr. Neira, thank you very much for your wonderful comments and your point about NDCs. It's well noted, and it's a fantastic thing to hear, and it's so visionary as well. And it's really great to hear that that's going to, you know, knowledge and education is a fundamental part to tackling the crisis. It underpins a lot of our thinking as well. And I really welcome your thoughts on, you know, how we need to operate and do things differently and interact in this more kind of like strategic way. And I guess that's the challenge in front of us, is how do we begin to institutionalize some of this vision and the strategic thinking that we have learned through this COVID pandemic. So I want to thank you, Dr. Neira, for your comments there. And what I would like to do now is take this conversation further to Elizabeth Cousens, President and CEO of the United Nations Foundation. Ambassador Cousens, what has the COVID-19 pandemic revealed about the connections that you know, further connections that between public health and the climate crisis that wasn't evident before? We would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Professor Jaffrey. And let me thank again our eminent co-hosts. We're delighted to be co-sponsoring today's discussion with you. And it is such an honor to follow Maria and to join this distinguished panel. And Maria, let me just say, I love the idea of being inoculated with intelligence. I think that I'll take it. That's a beautiful idea. Look, the connections between public health and climate change are deep. They are causal and they are multiple, and all of our opening speakers have walked through many of them. They range from the health impacts of polluted air to changing vectors of disease, impacts on the yield and nutritional value of staple foods, to the effects of extreme heat, including on healthcare facilities when we need to do things like keep vaccines cool, to mental health. And these and all the other material links between climate change and health, human, animal, and planetary, have been well known and substantiated for some time, and the pandemic just shined a very bright light on them. But the pandemic did more to reveal connections, and I want to highlight three themes where I think that really surfaced to the top of the agenda. First is the whole idea of preparedness. You know, in weeks, COVID-19 went from being something we'd never heard of to being the primary threat to human populations and economies worldwide. We were taken by surprise as a world, but there was no excuse for that. Pandemic experts, as we all know, have been warning for years about a threat of precisely this kind. And, you know, infectious disease experts often talk about the cycle between panic and neglect, with minimal progress in preparing properly for emergencies that we know will occur. Well, welcome to climate change, which has exactly this character and will require wholly new forms and scales of investment in preparedness and prevention on many levels. Second theme is equity. COVID-19 has exposed such severe inequities in human health that are, of course, compounded by other inequities around race, ethnicity, gender, income, people's place in the economy. And we're watching these play out both within and across countries on a daily basis. Well, the climate emergency raises precisely the same issues of visiting the worst effects on the most vulnerable, compounding other inequities, and having such severe distributional impacts that need to be much higher on the global agenda. And we've heard about some of that already. And the third theme is interdependence. You know, the pandemic is as elemental a threat to us all as we can imagine. So even as some countries race ahead with vaccines, it's a fantasy that we can beat the pandemic anywhere unless we beat it everywhere, and we know that. Well, clearly the climate emergency poses the same, and by climate, the larger planetary and ecological emergency included in it, poses the same challenge. No one, no country, no region will be able to prevail against the climate threat unless we treat it as a true planetary emergency that unites us all. So yes, in the short term, some may do a bit better than others, but as with a virus, climate change reveals our existential and ultimate interdependence on each other as human beings. So acting on that insight is of course going to require many changes. Many of them are underway, but many more are needed. And it's essential that we take that ultimate lesson home. So, you know, I hope that if the pandemic teaches us anything for the climate emergency, it's really those three things: preparing much more seriously for crises we know will come or are already here, putting equity at the core of our response, and acting with a clear conviction that we are mutually vulnerable, interdependent, and therefore have absolutely every interest in working together to resolve it.
Thank you, Ambassador Cousens. And I wonder if I could just stay with you for a second there and just follow on a little bit. I mean, the three things that you presented there, the challenges of addressing each one of them are colossal. And I'm just wondering, as you presented these new thoughts and lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, in your opinion, what sort of new partnerships and approaches are needed now to create impact to really address, and tackle the intersection of planetary health, human health, animal health, environmental health, but particularly picking up on the issue of equity and as we'd heard earlier on from other speakers about justice, to ensure that everyone is protected and not just the privileged few.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first answer is you have to be committed to doing that. And so I think the first overall answer to that question is intent. And it's a great question. And there are obviously many places to start when you start thinking about innovative partnerships. First, I think it's worth saying that the climate health intersection raises the same challenge that other intersectional issues do. And it is a real challenge to expert communities, institutions, financing mechanisms, advocates, all of whom for years have organized ourselves around singular issues. It's a challenge to all of us to get out of our silos and find new ways of collaborating. And I love, Maria, your other point about learning each other's language between NCDs and NDCs. I think that's a great emblem of that challenge. But let me just reel off a few examples of the diversity of partnerships out there already to maybe help us energize our thinking about the possibilities. And I'll just name a few types of partnerships. So here's an example: the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, well known to many on this call. It's been around for years. It's a great example of a sustained partnership between the research community and wider stakeholders to build cumulative evidence and knowledge about what works to increase agricultural productivity and reduce hunger while strengthening ecosystems. Huge scope to scale or replicate that kind of work on issues at the heart of the climate health nexus. I'll give you another example: the Local 2030 Islands Network. This is a partnership that brings together island nations and states together with partners from business, academia, civil society, broadly around the SDGs, but especially around tangible priorities that connect climate resilience, food security, and health. It's a great example of bringing partners together around common challenges that are very immediate to devise solutions that are immediately relevant to people at the local level. There are, of course, many impressive partnerships around specific challenges. I think of something like the Clean Cooking Alliance that works directly at the intersection of climate, clean energy, and health, particularly for women, or any number of examples of innovation at the local and subnational level. So I'll just give you two quick examples from my own country, the United States. California is now developing the country's most stringent regulations to reduce heavy vehicle pollution, which is of course partly for climate benefits, but it's also for overburdened communities who live along freight corridors or near ports where they face some of the worst pollution and the consequent health impacts. The city of Miami just appointed the nation's first chief heat officer in clear recognition of the health and economic impacts of climate change. And I think working with subnational actors around the world has huge potential because they're so close to their constituents. And we all know that health routinely tops people's priorities for themselves, their families, and communities. And last, just I would flag, it's already come up a little bit, but flag two major international moments that are very relevant to partnerships and can both seed and catalyze further. The first is the UN's high-level dialogue on energy. It's being led by Sustainable Energy for All. That's coming up this fall. And the second has already been mentioned, the Secretary General's Food Systems Summit being convened this September. It encompasses both terrestrial and aquatic food sources, so it connects and justice issues, and so it really connects the full 360 of issues related to both climate and health. There are huge opportunities to advance new ideas and partnerships around the climate health nexus. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador Cousens. It's a wonderful. It's often good to hear about, the examples of things of good practice that are happening out there, because we often forget that there are some wonderful collaborations and alliances that already exist, but also new thoughts that can begin to emerge in those kind of like platforms as well. So it's really wonderful to hear your thoughts on that. Ambassador Cousens, thank you very much. I'd like to now turn my attention to Mr. Andre Landerecht. Mr. Landreth, you were the COP25 presidency coordinator representing the Chilean presidency. As you know, the highest level of political leadership is needed for success during these moments. We're hearing a lot about we need to see change on the ground, but also as Dr. Neira had said, you know, we need to see that leadership from the front end, as well as Ambassador Cousens has mentioned. We need that commitment. What do you think can be done to ensure leaders understand the need to protect public health of the many and not just the privileged few by countering climate change? And how can these two agendas be better aligned in the upcoming COP26 to make sure that that COP is as successful as it can be?
Wow, tough question, really.
I like to challenge.
Thank you. Well, distinguished Excellency, authorities, colleagues, and participants. And it's a great pleasure to speak on behalf of Chile and the COP25 presidency and from the Ministry of Environment. As we know, the pace of change over the 50 years has been unprecedented in human history, and the human population has doubled, the global economy has expanded fourfold, and more than 1 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. However, this remarkable growth and prosperity has come to a heavy cost to the natural system that underpin life on Earth. Human activities have already severely altered a great proportion of land and marine environment. And the science is clear that climate change and nature laws are inextricably interlinked. Biodiversity is critically important to our health, our safety, and our livelihoods. Biodiversity underpins global nutrition and food security and helps fight diseases. Unfortunately, current production and consumption pattern, land use and urbanization, population dynamics, trade, industry, and governance model strengthen the loss of biodiversity, calling for a radical reset of humanity's relationship with nature. We are breaching the planet's boundaries beyond the ability of natural systems to cope, which is increasing the risk of large-scale, irreversible environmental and social changes. So effectively managing and mitigating such risks require a fundamental shift in thinking about the value of nature, including accounting for natural capital and the cost of ecosystem degradation within economic development. The degradation of ecosystem, the loss of biodiversity, and its unsustainable use have increased the risk of disease, spillover from wildlife to livestock and from animals to people. Climate change exacerbates this danger and increases the risk from vector-borne diseases. Solutions to this issue of nature loss are complex, but unless we take transformative action urgently, the risk and impact of such loss will only accelerate for the detriment of present and future generations. So today we're facing difficult times. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought one of the biggest socioeconomic crises the world has faced in centuries, affecting the life of people in all possible ways. In the short term, the first priority for government, and the Chilean government in this case, has been to protect the health of our citizens. But we must also deliver plans to recover our economies and jobs in the context of the other global crisis that has not been in quarantine, climate change. So COVID-19 has postponed COP26, but it has not postponed the need for parties to deliver on their commitments under the Paris Agreement. Most importantly, the submissions of more ambitious nationally determined contribution or NDCs this year, 31st July, that's the deadline. So updating NDCs is not an unnecessary distraction from the pandemic. On the contrary, new, updated, ambitious NDCs can be a blueprint, a beacon that guides a truly sustainable economic recovery from COVID-19. So in this spirit, in the month of April last year, Chile presented a significantly enhanced NDC that, in line with the Paris Agreement, targets a long-term vision of carbon neutrality by 2050. And our NDC represents a critical milestone on this path committing to a series of measures spanning adaptation and integrated action. For example, on ocean, forests, circular economy, finance, and nature-based solutions. We have a big challenge in front of us, no doubt, but at the same time, we have to see that as a unique opportunity to use this crisis really to accelerate our transformation to a more inclusive, cleaner, healthier, low carbon, and resilient economy for the world's future. So, addressing your question directly, how can we do towards COP26 and make it really a success? And I would say that's a very tricky question, and it's very tough questions to answer, mainly because for the COP to succeed and move forward, we cannot conduct negotiations on a virtual setting, I'm afraid. I mean, most countries, developing nations in particular, they are not willing to engage because of connectivity issues, because time zone, because regional coordination. There's so many things that impact that decision-making process. So for the last 18 months, the work has been stockpiling, and we have so many things to cover, and we are looking forward for the ministerial meeting that Alok Sharma has convened in person at the end of July in London to sort of try to unlock negotiations, because here you have technical negotiations and political negotiations. But at the end of the day, when we discuss climate change, it's very much interlinked. It's technical and political at the same time. So it's very challenging for ministers to be on top of those issues and to be able to provide the necessary guidance. My suggestion would be, as happened in the COP25 presidency, we worked for many, many years to introduce the ocean in the climate change discussion. After 25 years, we managed to introduce ocean in the agenda of the SBs, the SAFTA in particular. And we had a dialogue on ocean, and we will continue in COP26. We were working on a side event on the 3rd edition of Because of Our Ocean. Because for Chilean, if we really want a healthy population, we need a healthy ecosystem and healthy marine ecosystem, because our livelihood depends on those. So my recommendation would be, and we're working very closely with the UK, to put science at the very center. Not climate science, IPCC, or IPDES in the case of biodiversity, but science of health science, the best of the best. That's the only way. Can you believe that today we still countries that are skeptical about climate change, and they also raise questions about IPCC reports? So if we are in that kind of setting, you can imagine how difficult it would be for COP26 to really be successful. And then final reflection, what is success? Okay, so what is success for a COP? And that's a tricky one, because the agenda items are not presented or initiative of the country host or country presidency. We inherit those deadlines, those agenda items, which are mandated events or some of the report that have to be submitted. So it's very difficult to qualify what will be successful. And my recommendation would be to put science at the very center, and the communication-wise very clear. What do you want to accomplish? And do not generate over expectation, okay? And that's in the intergovernmental climate change process. But also there's a whole line which is called the climate action track, which do involve observers, civil society, private sectors. And we launched at the UN, in a lead up to COP25, the Climate Ambition Alliance, with the UN high-level champions, the climate COP champions, and we have more than 3,000 organizations from all sorts, university, all with the same goal, carbon neutrality by 2050. So I guess if we're going to be successful here, this is not just a party-driven process. We need to have the buy-in of the general society, and for that, I guess communications and putting science at the very center will be key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Landeret. It's been, you know, there are a lot of issues to unpack and to consider, and all I can say, you know, it's I'm hopeful that we will get a successful outcome, as you describe. You know, what is successful? But I guess the heart of the matter will be that if we're able to achieve, change for our people and our planet, that's essentially what this is all about. Yeah. So let's look forward to COP26, and I hope your thoughts have given our audience much to think about and consider in the run up. And I hope that the negotiations that happen in July are successful. So what I want to do now is thank you for your comments there, and I would like to turn my attention to Ms. Gabriela Cuevas Barrom, co-chair of the UHC 2030 Steering Committee and co-chair of the Task Force on Humanitarian Relief, Social Protection and Vulnerable Groups, the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. Ms. Barron, we're coming to recognise that universal health coverage is the best way to strengthen collective health security to protect us against future pandemics. What do you see are the biggest barriers to acting on this concept? And how do we ensure governments prioritise it at national and international levels? And I guess it kind of like spins on from my previous conversation that we've just had with Mr. Landaretti. And I don't expect you to unpack all of those challenges, but this naturally flows in. It flows from the comments that we've just had.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Well, it is very clear that health is a human right. In principle, this entails that no one should ever have to ever face restrictions to access the healthcare that they need. Unfortunately, and we have seen that during this terrible pandemic, that remains quite far from the truth. Currently, half of the global population doesn't have access to health essential services. And every year we have 100 million people forced into poverty by out-of-pocket health spending. Financial conditions should not dictate whether a person can lead a healthy life or not, but significant barriers remain to make that happen. Governments must understand that it is not possible to have successful and thriving economies without taking care of the people's health needs. The pandemic has shown how limitations in healthcare systems, which themselves should be addressed to ensure well-being for everyone, can create significant problems elsewhere. This is reflected in the impact that the COVID-19 has caused beyond health. If we take a look on what has happened last year in 2020, well, the IMF estimates that around 95 million more people fell into extreme poverty. So it is about having different crises in the world. And we can see that it's about health, it's about an economic crisis, it's about a climate crisis. And that's why, and I would like to bring that to this table, the Lancet, this scientific magazine, I'm sure that you all know about that, but they have a very interesting concept, which is a syndemic. And that shows the broad nature of health-related problems and the need to understand both climate change and health as interdependent. A syndemic is an aggregation of successive pandemics that have accumulated up this point. A commission by the Lancet has used this concept in reference to the interrelation between obesity, undernutrition, and climate change, which has been shown to have detrimental effects on human health. An example of this can be found in extreme weather events. And we can take a look to everything that is happening all around the world. I think that here, if we talk about climate change specifically, or if we go to universal healthcare, it is clear that we need to change. We need to change the model on how we are working with governments. I have been a parliamentarian all my life, so of course we are familiarized with all of this. But that includes also civil society, that includes the private sector. We need to understand that this is the planet that we have. And if we don't take care of this planet, we are not going to have a planet B, and we are going to face the consequences. And that's related, of course, as it has been mentioned, in terms of food, in terms of security, in terms of health emergencies, the pandemic. But everything goes into the same direction. We need political leadership, and that's where governments make a lot of sense. And national governments are, I think, a key element to translate all these international commitments into local realities. It is about governments who are negotiating all these global agreements. It is about governments and their parliaments to ratify all these instruments. It is about governments to translate all of this into legislation, into new rules, into new policies, into budgets. If we are not addressing climate change, if we are not able to include universal health coverage into national budgets, nothing is going to change. Because once we are able to change at the national level, in many cases, we need also to make changes at the local and community level. And that happens precisely with health systems. And that happens also in the way that we would like to take care of the planet. So yes, it is about political leadership. It is about changing the way that we understand our relationship with the planet, with the environment. And I think it's about taking commitments seriously. I believe that sometimes we have these beautiful announcements globally where everyone is going to sign, then they go back to their countries and share the wonderful news. But we need to make these global commitments to translate them into realities, into national changes, and understanding that we need to place people at the center of all decisions. That's the way to understand why climate change matters. And that's the way to end all this, I think, ridiculous debate about who started climate change. We all know that climate change is a fact, but now we also know that climate change is affecting people, the people that we represent, the people that we rule, the people that needs us, that trust us. So I think that it is very much about political will. It's about leadership. And I believe that government needs to understand the lessons from this pandemic. It's about, yes, climate change. It's about a health emergency that showed us that money is deciding who lives and who dies. It's about deciding who has access to health services and who doesn't. So I think that we are going to need to learn from the lessons, and that's, again, why I was bringing to this table this concept of a endemic, because even that the Lancet is using obesity, undernutrition, and climate change, I believe that that goes beyond. That goes in the way that we're producing, the way that we're consuming, the way that we, even governments, I think that governments need to change. So I really hope that we understand this concept of a endemic and we go next to the next step for a global and very comprehensive solution. Again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barron. And it's, you know, this whole, I think you presented that so wonderfully. The need to place people at the heart of our decision-making process. It's absolutely fundamental and vital. And this business about leadership is so vital. And I'm just throwing in another spin here before we move on to our next speaker. Is just this business about gender leadership and ensuring that women are at the heart of decision-making processes. But you know, in terms of human rights, everyone on this planet has the right to a decent quality of life, and no one should be denied you know, that right because someone in another part of the world is having is doing very well. You know, everyone is equal, and that's why placing and addressing climate inequality and ensuring that finance reaches those who need it the most, and ensuring gender sensitive equitable finance is really an important part of this conversation. And with that in mind, I want to thank you, Ms. Barron, for your input there, and I want to turn my attention in taking those conversations to Ms. Petra Bayer, who's member of the Interparliamentary Union Advisory Group on Health, a member of the Austrian Parliament. Ms. Bayer, wonderful to have you. And obviously, this is a very, you know, challenging conversations that we're having. What do you consider, or can the role of parliaments and parliamentarians indeed be strengthened to ensure that they demand simultaneous action on climate change and the health agenda, and just expanding on that a little bit to ensure that we have addressed social inclusion in our approach, which is you know, some of the things that our previous speaker, Ms. Barron, has been highlighting too. So Ms. Bayer, look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening from Vienna. I would like to focus on possibilities for parliamentarians, especially on children, what can be done for children, and share some thoughts about human rights or children's rights on a clean environment. We all are sure the pandemic is most damaging for poor and vulnerable, and children belong to most vulnerable groups for sure. We do not yet fully understand the long-term risks of COVID-19 infections for children. They may be severe, but we definitely do understand long-term risks of climate crisis for our children. And like in the pandemic, the harmful effects of climate crisis will not be distributed equally. It is most damaging for children in the poorest countries and in the poorest neighborhoods, and for those who are already disadvantaged or vulnerable. So for instance, parliamentary or political decisions about development cooperation and whom these address are very, very crucial. So let me think that the global climate crisis is also a child rights crisis, because children are facing lots of risks. For instance, devastating droughts and floods, extreme weather, destruction of natural resources, in particular land, soil, and water. They suffer from severe livelihood conditions, from famines and malnutrition. And malnutrition is the main underlying cause of 45% of all preventable deaths of children under 5. They are also in danger to lose their homes. The UN forecasts 200 million environmental migrants by 2050. And children also are affected because those of them who live in the poorest communities are the most vulnerable to pollution. They live near industrial areas, working in toxic dump sites and hazardous processes facilities. We know that 1.8 billion children under the age of 15 years breathe toxic air, and 1 in 3 children have unacceptable high levels of lead in their blood. The WHO estimates that 20% of deaths of children under 5 years can be prevented by addressing environmental risks. And of course, policymakers, lawmakers are called to keep that in mind with all the decisions they take. The poorest and most marginalized communities on this planet have contributed the least to the problem. Countries like Somalia or Malawi, with the lowest emission per capita, are the front line when it comes to devastating impacts of climate change. So it's a question of global and intergenerational justice. It's a question of climate justice, and we are making climate policy. So it's up to us as policymakers to take the right decisions, also to hear the advice of the children-led Fridays for Future movement. We increasingly hear children's voices on climate issues. So we need to respond in an adequate way, of course. States have the primary duty to protect everyone from exposure to pollution and other hazardous substances. States have a duty to design, implement, and enforce public health, environmental, climate, and labor laws to protect children from toxic chemicals and pollution. So what shall be done? I would like to call for an alliance of politicians, civil society, and science. And I would like to suggest 3 alliances. First of all, an alliance for carbon taxes on luxury items. The overconsumption of a wealthy minority is fueling the climate crisis and putting the whole planet in peril, everybody who is living there. We know that the richest 10% are accountable for over half of the carbon dioxide emissions, and the richest 1% is accountable for 15% of the emissions. That's more than twice than the poorest half of humanity. They just produce 7% of carbon dioxide emissions. So there is an unbalanced impact of different people. So we need to increase wealth taxes and new carbon taxes on luxury items like private jets or super yachts or carbon intensive SUVs and other things. The second alliance I would like to call for is against corporate lobbying that is really terrible for our environment and for the climate. And I just want to mention as an example the recent Greenpeace investigations on Exxon as America's biggest oil company, which is fighting efforts to tackle climate crisis in the United States, despite publicly claiming that they support the Paris Climate Agreement. But in reality, they fought very early climate science through shadow groups, powerful networks of think tanks and pressure groups. They invested tens of millions of dollars in campaigning against a binding global climate agreement. They already against the Kyoto Agreement in more than 20 years ago, and cowardly fought to prevent a ban of toxic chemicals and push back against carbon tax. So an alliance should disclose this corporate policy and the gap between their beautiful booklets on sustainability and the real policy they are trying to follow. And the third and last alliance is one for liability of companies responsibly causing environmental damage, and force the polluter pay principle. In Europe, the environment is being destroyed mainly by companies, and it's the citizens who are paying the bill for that, despite the fact that the principle, this polluter pays principle is active, is applied in the European Union. It's still a matter of fact that more than 42% of the remediation measures for polluted soils are financed by public funds, including European Union funds. So I think that also a legislative initiative on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence obligations for companies need to be incorporated. And I strongly support, for instance, the so-called treaty process at the UN in Geneva that is calling for a binding international law to hold private sector accountable for human rights, for social rights, and also for environmental rights and the infringement of these rights. And that all will protect children, of course, and will also contribute to the principle, leave no one behind. So I think that parliamentarians can really make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. And it's wonderful to see, I mean, you're talking about children, but the need to protect our future generations. And, you know, that very much speaks to the issue of intergenerational justice. And we're hearing a lot about that as part of the discussions around ensuring that we address climate change through a climate just lens, and embedding those principles and approaches. And it's wonderful to hear about those alliances, and particularly the liability issue. And I'm thinking, you know, the more we hear about climate litigation and the more court cases that come through, will send a very strong signal to others to pay attention to the crisis, and not want to be embroiled in those kind of like arguments and discussions. So there's a lot to be thinking about, but it's wonderful to hear those practical ideas. So Ms. Bayer, thank you very much with that. And I want to just lift some of the things that you're saying and direct that to Mr. Sergey Morand, who's the research director at CNRS, CIRAD. So, I mean, there's so much that we've been hearing, and ranging from political leadership right through to climate litigation. I'm just going to ask you one very specific question here, Mr. Morand. what do you think is the role for development actors and academia to come together to address, you know, the intersection of challenges that we're facing? So if I can just pose one very specific question to you, it'd be wonderful to hear your thoughts on that.
First, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very, very glad. First, as a disease and health ecologist, working for many years on biodiversity and health, glad to hear how the global leaders have already acknowledged the consequences of ongoing climate change and they are working on actions. And I'm glad also to hear that we need science and improve science policy dialogue. We know already that rural and urban communities are facing increasing number of heat waves, food security is challenged, forests are affected by drought and wildfire, the loss of biodiversity is accelerating, several ecosystems may soon reach tipping points and potential collapse. There are more and more outbreaks of infectious disease, and not to speak of emerging disease. So what we have now, we have two approaches to improve interdisciplinarity, so which means environmental sciences, medical science, veterinary science, social science and economics, and intersectoriality. So with public health, agriculture, natural resource, economy, just to mention some of us. The first one is a One Health approach. It's a good way to better link human health, animal health, and ecosystem health. It's very important also because here we can really work on local solution. And the second one is the planetary health, that linking planetary boundaries, climate change, biodiversity, loss on land systems, and the global health communities. But about all, after the social and economic impact of COVID-19 on nations and communities, we need to give optimism and to show success stories at both global and local levels. For science, it means that now we have to work more on solution. For a health ecologist like me, is to work on the implementation of an ecosystem-based approach for climate, biodiversity, and health. So how to do? So thanks, unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemics, we have several important global initiatives that have been launched to better prevent infectious disease. I would just mention one, the One Health tripartite, linking WHO, OIE, and FAO, together with the United Nations Environmental Programme. They jointly launched a One Health high-level expert panel. I have the sense to be members of these experts, serving as member of the UNEP with the help of this One Health tripartite plus UNEP. We have to provide relevant scientific assessment on the emergence of health crises arising from the human-animal ecosystems interface. And we have three main tasks. Action on climate change needs to broaden our vision to adapt human environmental paradigms for a better human health and planetary health. We need, as I already said, develop solutions such as ecosystem-based solutions. And we need to improve the scientific debate on the way to share with the stakeholders, with the public, complex results. We should develop this arena forum that facilitate discussion among different global initiatives. We still work on silos. We need the expert panel to exchange in order to enhance the synergies needed for a better science policy dialogue. But these need and presuppose to develop a system thinking in order to be less dependent on particularly setting and more knowledgeable, adaptable, and flexible. This also presupposes to explore, access, and obtain knowledge, not only knowledge for science, but knowledge for the stakeholders, knowledge for the communities, and to think beyond boundaries, outside local processes and to foster interconnection across organization, institution, and, for me, disciplines, across communities and genders, and across nations, regions, and communities. This is the only way to tackle as a scientist and as a stakeholders the complex issues of global health communities and planetary health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morand. And I think it's music to my ears to hear you talk about the need for interdisciplinary research, having worked in development and now as an academic. I completely echo everything that you said, and you know the urgent need to move away from working in silos is absolutely vital. And with the science, it is about the solutions end, but also our role to evaluate, provide evidence and demonstrate the impact of different ways of working and getting that documented and evidenced correctly with sound rationale is really vital, because it's a cornerstone for furthering investment into things that are working well, but also helping us to understand what's not working and how we need to address some of those challenges. So thank you very much, Mr. Moran, for your inputs there. What I would like to do now, since we're talking about science, is just turn very quickly to Dr. Mark Vermeersch, who's Executive Director at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute. Dr. Vermeersch, we're hearing just there about the role for science and technology and the need for interdisciplinary research. I'm just going to ask one very specific question around the work that you're doing at your institute in terms of support for mitigation and adaptations to deal with threats. What do you think? How is your institute contributing to these conversations? If you can provide a particular example that you'd like to share with the panel about the wonderful work that you're doing there.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Excellencies, dear delegates, friends, and colleagues. I'm really delighted to be part of this panel discussion, and I want to thank the organizers for having invited me and given the opportunity to contribute. As an introduction, if you allow me a personal comment, so it's not the official voice of Kerry here, but more of a personal comment. I've been very much delighted to hear many of the contributions here during this 1 hour and 37 minutes exactly. And I must confess that I was wondering, we all agree, I think, that the COVID pandemic, and I'm sorry, it's a bit outside of the scope of the Institute, but I think it's very important. We all agree that the pandemic has been a terrible experience, but I can tell you, and I think we would agree, that it is nothing compared to what is coming with the climate change. We have to be absolutely clear on that. Of course, the impact on the public health, the impact on the massive migrations that will happen, and of course, the impact on the public health, on the kids, and on the populations, we have to be perfectly aware of what is coming. And it has started. I cannot accept hearing some people in the world still questioning the origin of climate change happening or not happening. And in fact, the COVID has been a terrible experience, and it's a very serious wake-up call for the humankind. We have to be aware of that. And I was wondering, listening to all the delegates, why this happened and why it has spread so quickly, and it put all the economies down. All the economies have more or less collapsed. And again, it is nothing compared to what the climate change will create on the economies. And I think, very modestly, that we just follow the wrong target. And until and unless we understand that the humankind, the human species, is part of the environment and part of the mother nature, and it's not the human species fighting against the mother nature or the environment, but being part of the environment, there is no planet B. I heard the delegates saying this. Of course, there is no planet B, but if we don't want the human species to be just a small incident in Earth's history, we have to act. And I cannot prevent myself from wondering, why don't we move? Why don't we take the right decisions? And coming to science and technology, I must confess, of course, I would even say, to be a bit provocative, that at the end, science and technology are easy. We have all the tools to tackle climate change. We all know what to do. We have the tools. We can keep searching. Of course, we need better tools. We need to improve. We need to work on the different components I will highlight. And this is what we do in the Institute. But why is it not happening? Why the decisions are not taken? Is it not the same reason that the reason of the pandemic and why the economies have been collapsing so quickly? And it will take years to recover from that. We know, of course, we are recovering already, but it will take years to recover. And again, it is nothing compared to what is coming with climate change. So coming to the Institute, I'm sorry, the introduction was a bit long, but I think it was a personal comment that was worth sharing with you. Coming to the Institute, I guess you are not very familiar with the Institute, and it's not the goal to do the branding or the marketing of the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute. We work mostly on energy, water, and environment, and we focus on arid regions. Of course, the goal, we are an institute, part of the Ahmad bin Khalifa University, but we are not an academic institute. We do applied research and what I call market-driven research, so very much applied. And we are a member of the Qatar Foundation, working at the national level, just as a quick introduction. And of course, the primary goal is to help the state of Qatar. We are funded by the government of Qatar indirectly, but at the end, the money is coming from the state of Qatar. But I must say that, unfortunately, what we do for the state of Qatar applies to many, many regions in the globe, on Earth. And the number of arid regions and the size of these arid regions all over the world are increasing. So what we do in the state of Qatar can be applied, adapted to Middle East, Northern Africa, and most of the continents of the world. So we don't have experts working on health at all, but we need to have a holistic approach. We work with the health experts present in the state of Qatar, in the government, in different institutions. But I think I can say we work on most of the components impacting the health and the health system in the state of Qatar and many other countries. Of course, it can be copy-pasted or adapted to many other countries. So if I take a very quick example to be synthetic, one of the key partnerships we have that are key for the climate change and key to help not only the state of Qatar, but many other countries in the world is a partnership with the NASA JPL, Propulsion Laboratory, which is called the Space Act Agreement. It's a major agreement between Kerry and the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And the goal, in fact, it's a feasibility study to have a space mission to bring a tool, a radar, able to do the mapping of not only the arid regions, the aquifers, the ice sheets, and to monitor and have a dynamic image and a dynamic monitoring of the ice sheets on the globe, of the arid regions and the aquifers. It is key if we want to tackle climate change, if we want to work on adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies, we have to understand, we have to monitor, we have to do the modeling. So this is a very good example of the key partnerships we are involved in. There are many other elements. Of course, who says climate change says temperature rise, temperature of the water, temperature of the air. It has an impact on pollution. We do the air quality monitoring. We try to understand what does impact the air quality, what does impact the pollution in the state of Qatar. Not saying that it is worse than in other countries, but it is something we want to work on, and we do. We work on the sea level rise. Of course, we have a very simple representation, sea level rise. We can imagine the flooding of the state of Qatar. The average elevation of Qatar is not that high, but it is already coming. And even if it's not visible, look at the state of Qatar. It is surrounded by heavily salinated water. And because of the aquifers and the geological nature of the underground, these aquifers are contaminated by seawater. And it is getting worse and worse. We keep pumping in the aquifers, we keep desalinating water, we keep increasing the salinity of the Gulf waters. So globally, and to conclude, we need a holistic approach. We cannot look at only one component. We have to partner, we have to work together. And again, most of the tools are on the table, are on the shelf. And I don't have any specific recommendation beyond the top priority to collaborate, to work together. But I think we have to change the target. If we keep following the same target that are behind the terrible collapse experience of the economies and what is coming with the climate change, we won't make it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark Vermeersch. I mean, it's really interesting to hear, you know, but not just the challenges, but the reality check there, as you described it, and which is, you know, very much at the heart of what we need to be at the front of these conversations. It's that reality check, but also your point at the very beginning that we have the technology, we have the know-how. We need to just get it out there and make it happen and ensure that change takes place, that, you know, it's in our power to do so, and we need to really run with that. So with that, making change happen, I want to now hand over to our final guest, Mr. Nigel Sizer, who's the Executive Director of Preventing Pandemics. We need to see that, you know, change happen. One very, very clear question, Mr. Sizer: how do you prevent pandemics? How do preventing pandemics and addressing the climate emergency connect in your work? If you could summarize your thoughts on that. I mean, it's a huge question, but we would love to hear your thinking on that.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Jaffrey, and thanks to all the fantastic speakers who've gone before me. I know that you're running over time a little, so I'll be very brief. I would start by saying I think perhaps the most important thing we need to do if we are to achieve a sustainable and resilient recovery, as you said at the very beginning of this, is to prevent another pandemic like this from happening. 7 out of 7 of the pandemics of the last 100 years, all of them, including COVID-19, are zoonotic in origin. They're all the result of a spillover of viruses from wildlife into humans. How does this link with climate change? Well, in various different ways, but one of the key ways is that spillover risk is far greater when forests, especially the very biodiverse tropical forests, are cleared and when wildlife is exploited. This leads to greater interaction between humans and wildlife, especially bats and rodents, which carry coronaviruses and most of the other viruses which are of greatest risk to us. Clearing forests also emits 10–15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions that result from human activity. Removing the megafauna, the large species of animals from forests, and taking them off as live animals into the wildlife trade, which is very risky in terms of disease transmission, also disrupts the fundamental ecology of those forests, the dispersal of many species of large trees, and that also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. So there's an extraordinary convergence at the source of this pandemic and all previous pandemics and climate change when we get to land use change, particularly in tropical regions, and the wildlife trade. And also in the health of the communities that live around those forests. So where deforestation is actively taking place, local communities tend to have poorer health and higher pathogen loads than where deforestation is not taking place. So there's a common solution here. It's not the only solution. It's a key part of the solution, though, which is being missed almost completely in discussions about pandemic prevention, which is the need to prevent spillover at the source. Protecting intact forests and wildlife, working to improve the healthcare of local communities in those regions is very good for the climate, and it's very good for preventing pandemics. And the really good news is that we actually know how to do that. Indonesia has shown significant progress in just the last 4 or 5 years. Brazil made major progress up until a few years ago in protecting its tropical forests. China, during COVID-19, has taken major and dramatic steps to reduce the consumption and trade of live wildlife very effectively. So we've convened a coalition of leading healthcare and environmental organizations supported on the science by Harvard University to advocate and push for policy changes in this direction. Our focus is on deep prevention, on expanding efforts to reduce the risk of spillover at the source. And just to wrap up, what this means for us is greatly expanding existing and new funding mechanisms that will scale up the solutions that are already proven that we know that work. We're making good progress with the US Congress, who are starting to appropriate resources for this, with several new bills in the works, and are later this week engaging with the G20 finance ministers who are meeting in Venice. The bottom line on this, literally the bottom line on this, is according to carefully peer-reviewed work by economists and scientists, about $10 billion a year in additional funding would make a very, very significant difference to these efforts and greatly reduce the risk of future pandemics happening again. So thank you very much. I'll put a link to our work in the chat if people would like to see more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sizer. And I think that that's really, I mean, it really follows on from the previous conversation about solutions that work, because that's what we really need to hear, and we need to understand how to implement, you know, those approaches that are going to drive and enable a step change to tackling our crisis. So once, you know, we have a pretty good understanding of how to tackle the pandemic and all the resources that have gone into it, in a way, we should be doing the same for addressing the climate crisis. And, you know, the journey towards that has been far longer and more complicated than it has been this short-term crisis of COVID-19. So, Mr. Niger, thank you very much for that, and it's wonderful to see that you've put the link in the chat box for everyone to hear. So apologies, everyone. I know that we're running over time. This has been a really wonderful conversation. If it was up to me, I would keep everyone online for another half an hour to have more discussions around everything that we've heard. But what I would like to do, though, is to express my sincere thanks to all of our distinguished guests today for the very rich and insightful discussion. My job now is to take this discussion away and try to summarize to some extent what we've heard, just so that this conversation, this very rich conversation, is not lost. And I'm very clear on that, because we often get involved in online discussions and then they kind of like disappear. And I think we've heard a lot of good ideas about what the challenges are and what we need to see change in the happen in the short, medium, in the long term. So it has left me and I hope our audience lots to think about. Just by way of close, I would just like to take this opportunity to say that I'll be chairing the Second World Forum on Climate Justice, which is fully online the 21st to the 23rd of September. So please do have a look on that and feel free to register. So I'm looking forward to doing that, and a lot of the conversation that we've had today will be certainly featured in that conversation. And I certainly look forward to hosting Maria Neira in Glasgow for the Global Climate and Health Conference to take place in November. So we're really excited about that. So hopefully we will see each other in Glasgow, because Glasgow is where I'm actually based myself. So without further ado, my gratitude to the permanent missions of Qatar, Bangladesh, Chile, France, Kenya, Morocco and Tajikistan, the United Nations in New York, UNEP, and the United Nations Foundation for this opportunity today, for this very rich conversation. So thank you, good afternoon, good evening, good morning indeed, if it may be, for wherever you are, and enjoy the rest of the day. Please do send me a line if you need to connect on any of the matters that we've heard today. And again, once again, apologies, I won't be able to go back into the conversation, but let's hope to connect again very, very soon. So thank you, and goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, Kwaheri.